Good afternoon, and welcome to another live and interactive installment of Live at the Waterhole. My name is Liam Burrow. I am the lucky naturalist that's going to be chatting you through a couple of these waterside scenes this afternoon. And what a pleasure to be kicking things off at Rosy's Pan outside the town of Hoedspruit in South Africa's Limpopo province with a couple of elephants, my absolute favorite. But anyway, before we get too carried away with all of the excitement around the water's edge this afternoon, I'd like to remind you that these programs are, of course, live, and we do like to keep them as interactive as possible. So please keep your questions, thoughts, comments coming to us throughout the show. Director Luyanda and myself will be standing by, waiting excitedly to hear from you. But beautiful. It's a particularly dry looking day here at Rosy's. Across much of sub-Saharan Africa, rainfall has been a little disappointing this season, and the dry season is well underway. Thankfully though, with spots like Rosy's peppered across this landscape, there is hope for the wildlife. And many of these animals still have places where they can slake their thirst. Now, these are not adult male elephants. Both of these are reasonably young males. I would estimate somewhere in the vicinity of mid to late 20s in terms of years. They're just a couple of young men, bachelors. And as this game reserve's name suggests, it is the home of elephants. Some phenomenal elephant viewing out of Olifantswest on the southern banks of the magnificent Olifants River, which is located a little bit back behind these Ellie Bulls over the ridge. It's a very special part of the world. I was actually lucky to spend essentially one of the first chapters of my career as a naturalist and a guide, leading safaris, both vehicle and walking safaris, here in Olifantswest itself. So I know the property intimately. Certainly one of my favorite places in the world. And being open to the very special thing that is the Greater Kruger National Park, Olifantswest does get an enormous natural movement of animals across quite a wide range. A particularly good thing for elephants. apologies there. Our feed does seem to have frozen. We'll see if it stabilizes. Otherwise, I'm sure there is somewhere else we can go. And there we go. Our apologies for that. Possibly a slight technical difficulty. But crossing over to Juma and a nice lazy-looking Cape Buffalo bull. In the minutes before we went live, there were 2 bulls here, so I don't think this chap is completely alone. Questions and comments already starting to come in. Hello, Darcy Miller. Nice to have you on board with us. A familiar name, a familiar voice. Yeah, stick around. Let's see what is in store for us this afternoon. Hello, Mercedes. Nice to have you on board as well. Mercedes says, can't get enough of Ellie's. Definitely not, Mercedes. We will keep an eye on that feed at Rosy's, and hopefully if it stabilizes, we can check back in there. Though, as mentioned earlier, with things drying out across a lot of these landscapes, elephant viewing here at Live at the Waterhole is maybe not necessarily a guarantee, but yeah, it's something that we can almost bet on. So let's see where we'll get the Ellies today. But anyway, speaking of meteorological conditions, let's have a look at what's in store for us across our varied locations in terms of the weather. So it looks like reasonably warm and dry conditions for us across many of our various locations. Such is fairly typical of Southern Africa at this time of the year. But check this guy out. That might be a nice lilac-breasted roller. I think it is one of our most colorful residents, and certainly a safari staple. Yeah, an undeniably photogenic bird. And quite interestingly, both sexes of the lilac-breasted roller that we're actually looking at are quite vivid and quite beautiful. So there's no sexual dimorphism to speak of, as is the case with so many other bird species, with a very attractive colorful, bright, vivid male and a fairly drab female. And thankfully for us, these rollers, the lilac-breasted roller specifically, is a resident in places like Juma and across much of its range throughout the Greater Kruger and throughout the year. Where other rollers like the European have already turned around and started to make their migration back up to parts of Europe for Europe's summer. These lilac-breasteds hang around. Hello, Magda Joubert. Magda says, hi Liam and everyone, I miss WildEarth on my TV so much, I'm watching on my phone. Hello, Magda. Nice to have you with us. And yeah, that is a bit of a sad state of affairs with us not being on DSTV anymore. But thanks very much for adapting and kind of shifting with the times. We appreciate you sticking with us and checking us out on your phone. And definitely stay tuned. It promises to be an exciting afternoon. As I say, with quite warm conditions and fairly dry conditions across much of our southern African locations, we should have a lot of thirsty animals coming down to the water's edge. But let's see what's in store. And after all, that is the nature of this kind of programming. It is unscripted, it's raw, so we just never know what we're going to get. But I don't think I've ever had a boring day. There's always something interesting to chat about. And yeah, nice to see a couple of buffalo here at Juma. As I say, nice to see a couple of buffalo here at Juma. We haven't been seeing an awful lot of buffalo activity at many of our other locations. So perhaps we can check those bulls out a little bit again. And certainly things are hotting up as we're approaching 1 p.m. here at Juma. You can see the effect of that heat haze on the picture of that roller. Yeah, the dry season beckons. Thankfully, the rains thankfully the rains in parts of the Greater Kruger, like Juma, haven't been too bad this year. You can see that in the fairly rich-looking grass layer, and that will be definitely a safety net, a saving grace for a lot of our herbivore species as we go into the next couple of very, very dry months. But anyway, I believe that our feed at Rosy's has improved somewhat, so perhaps let's check back in over there. Beautiful, and our Ellie bull is still at the water's edge. A couple of impala moving around in the background as well. Always a good idea to keep an eye on the bushes in the background there here at Rosy's. There is quite a lot of animal movement through this particular patch of red bushwillow woodland. And in recent shows, we've had sightings of wild dogs and even a pride of lions here at Rosy's. And of course, the almost ever-present elephants. A couple of helmeted guinea fowl coming out of the bush as well. Also very thirsty birds this afternoon, and a big flock of them. That impala does look like he's keen to come down for a drink, but perhaps a little bit nervous with this big elephant bull stood right here. Yeah, the elephants are sort of the big dominant presence when it comes to the water's edge, even though there's plenty of water around, or water available, and these Ellie bulls can be pretty cheeky. They like to have the water exclusively for themselves. I think that elephant has spotted the movement. He probably doesn't know exactly what that impala is. But he's giving us nice alert body language there. Head up, ears out. Apologies, it does look like this feed is freezing again, and it is. So now for something completely different, and this lush green oasis was Old Donyo in southern Kenya. We're now somewhere else. We are in Jamala. We are in Jamala. Alrighty, somebody is saying in my ear that we're having some difficulties with a couple of the Africam feeds this afternoon, so sincere apologies for that. But a couple more Ellies here at Jamala in Madikwe Game Reserve. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of this content is streamed via satellite internet connection from the very remote areas in which it is occurring. So technical difficulties are something we do tend to deal with on occasion. But bear with us. Hopefully we can figure it out. And nice, we actually haven't been spending a whole lot of time around this Jamala waterhole here at Madikwe. We seem to go to Tau far more regularly. I'm not 100% sure why that is. Perhaps there's been a connectivity issue here somewhere. But this is such a hive of activity, especially for Ellies. And sticking to that idea, looks like a very big herd coming down this afternoon. Mixed in with a couple of bachelors, those very biggest individuals are definitely bulls. And of course, many of you will know that bulls don't really spend too much time with the females. Breeding herds made up of cows and calves are solid units with no permanent male family members. But around the water's edge where these herds converge, it could be a pretty wonderful kind of meeting place. Elephants, as we know, are of course such social creatures. This is a wonderful opportunity for them to rub shoulders and possibly even a chance for these bulls to assess the mating condition of a couple of these cows. Yeah, you can see a much less well-defined grass layer here at Madikwe. As far as southern Africa goes, these northernmost reaches really have had a bit of substandard rainfall this year. Yeah, it's quite tricky to kind of predict what's in store for us in terms of the climate and the greater rainfall. But we do seem to be in a bit of a dry cycle at the moment, in stark contrast to the way things are going up at Old Donyo and many other parts of East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, where torrential rainfall and even flooding is occurring at the moment. But being much more equatorial, up close to the equator, conditions are quite different. But let's see, our turn will come again. This too shall pass. You can see fairly boisterous and dominant body language from that big bull kind of moving off on the far left there. It does tend to make the significantly smaller cows and calves a bit nervous. I think these very testosterone-fueled bulls can be quite frightening for them. And that is probably the biggest reason why these bulls are not welcomed as members of the breeding herds. Mercedes says, I wish Africam would stream Jamala as well. Yeah, Mercedes, as I say, I'm not quite sure why we haven't been seeing so much of Jamala lately. Possibly there's been some sort of issue with the camera, something like that. Thankfully, we've got quite a few other spots to choose from, but it is always great to come back here. Certainly in my time live at the Waterhole over the last couple of months, this Jamala Waterhole has been chock-a-block with activity. We've seen all sorts here. And again, this Jamala Waterhole is artificially pumped, so there's a hidden pump under the ground there somewhere. Pumping water up from the water table a couple of 100 foot below these elephants' feet. and that ensures a supply of fresh water, which will be a life-saving resource for many species, not just elephants, as things move into the dry season. I think that might be a giraffe. It is kind of above the elephants under a very tall marula tree there. Maybe when it's given a gap, it'll get to come down to the water's edge as well. Always such a privilege to see elephants congregating in numbers. It always makes me feel that we're kind of getting a window back in time to some degree, to a time where scenes like this were very common throughout Africa. And sadly, that's not really the case across much of what would have been the historical range. So as little as 100 years ago, a single century, there were reckoned to be something like 10 million African elephants in Africa. But the most recent continental elephant census, so essentially a big game count to count the elephant population across the entire continent from north to south, revealed something like 350,000, which, if you think of them all in one place, is a whole lot of elephants. But down from around 10 million in just 100 years, tells a very sad story of decline and pressure from the human world. So long may these special reserves, such as Madikwe, long may they exist, and long may they provide a home for these most magnificent pachyderms. I certainly don't fancy living in a world where we can't go out into the wild and see things like elephants. Couple of blue wildebeest around the water's edge there as well, probably giving these elephants pole position. As mentioned earlier, the elephants are in charge. Everybody else just sort of has to wait their turn. You might also find there's a little bit of short grass growing close here to the water's edge, fertilized by all of the elephant dung that these wildebeest are feeding on. Yeah, quite a few of these wildebeest around. See a big bull in the background there doing a bit of pawing on the ground. In order to mark territory, these wildebeest bulls will occasionally urinate and defecate into a scrape that they've made, kind of stir it up with their feet, and then occasionally even rub some preorbital glands. They've got scent glands on their face, around their eyes, into that concoction. And apparently to a female wildebeest, that is fairly irresistible in the right conditions. Definitely some cheeky elephant behavior there. That young elephant bull taking the opportunity to pick on something smaller than himself. Younger elephants very often seem to have a case of, I guess you'd call it short man syndrome. They're small in stature, but lots of attitude, which they seem to grow out of the bigger they get. Good afternoon, Spas. Spas says, all of these elephants at Jamala have made my afternoon. Thank you for sharing. Liam, it is an absolute pleasure, Spas, and nice to have you on board as well. Lots of regulars tuning in today. We appreciate you guys. Yeah, it is such a quintessential safari scene, and certainly a quintessential African scene, seeing these great herds. 12 or so years working as a guide and a naturalist, predominantly in the Greater Kruger, the Sabi Sands, the same sort of area as Juma, Rosy, etc., to spend literally hours with elephants. They are, without a doubt, no competition minded fact. So for me, I think it's just the fact that their behavior, so much time you spend with them, your behavior, if you look closely enough. And I think it's always activity, where a lion or a leopard spends 80, possibly even 90% of its time asleep, and an elephant spends 90% of its time walking around. I apologize. We seem to be having breakups here as well as here. So that isn't an issue at all of our cameras today, but we'll certainly keep an eye on it, do what we can, and if all else fails, we can go to one of the other live locations. Like it's in the tier come down out of the bush as well. So yeah, this location is an absolute hive of activity. Just something about the picture and that shakiness. Yeah, apologies. We are attempting to troubleshoot this to get it a little bit more stable as we speak. But bear with us. Okay, tough wood. Apparently that is sounding a little bit better. So let's go from there. Yeah, as I was saying a little bit, certainly our internet connections and the way signals from these and reasonably remote locations are without a doubt, if I chat, is traveling all over the place. Yeah, perhaps with things like Starlink and whatnot arriving in parts of Africa, these sort of tasks will become a bit easier. Wonderful to see that big giraffe bull out in the open. We do back once again. It is here. Yeah, as I say, we will keep our and if it's really bad, hopefully we can just go somewhere else. But yeah, certainly some wonderful elephant interaction on the far side there. Quite a language and posturing, but a number of those larger bulls. But cows are a bit of a swim, bit of a mud wallow. So thanks for that, Orchid Fairy. Do male Ellies, after being kicked out of their herd, ever come back in contact with their original herd? So Orchid Fairy, they certainly do. It's documented in the groups that they were born into. Yeah, certainly they live like a long relation. Alrighty, well, things do seem a little bit more stable here at Stony Point for whatever reason, and thankfully so. What an interesting thing to be looking at along the coast here. Checking out a number of rock hyraxes, enjoying what looks like a slightly cloudy day, close to the waterfront. Yeah, just sat basking on the rocks. They are such funny looking little animals. There's skinny little legs. Oh, there's number 4. Skinny little legs, big round bodies. Yeah, many people looking at them for the first time would be forgiven for thinking they are something like a rodent, a guinea pig, or even a rabbit, something like that. But in actual fact, their closest connections in the wild, and certainly occurring in Africa, are bizarrely the African elephant. They share very similar bone structure in their feet, in particular the amount of digits and the construction of those toes. They've got a very similar stomach system, I suppose, quite similar diets. And adults even have a fairly well-developed set of tusks in their upper jaw. Yeah, seriously bizarre. Joan Mello says, "Oh yes, my favorite place, so beautiful." Definitely, Joan. This part of South Africa is a wild and varied location, a place of extremes, if you will. But yeah, certainly the occurrence of some very rich oceans, meeting very wild and diverse coastline can be a recipe for some incredible diversity of animals, from a whole host of marine mammals, fish, to all of the incredible species that we do so love to see on land itself. Well, these rock hyraxes are just sitting very still. Yeah, it pays for them to be hyper vigilant, as some of their biggest predators come from above. So in areas like this, the Varroa eagle, an enormous eagle species, which is actually a hyrax or a dussie specialist, is a real concern for them. And even things like the caracal population, the caracal being a smaller wild cat, and even the Cape leopard, specialize in making a meal of these plump little rock hyraxes. Sugarbits asks, do dassies mate for life? Sugarbits, not to my knowledge. They're highly gregarious animals living in colonies, and there's 5 of them at least now. So no, not to my knowledge. I think a bit like elephants as well, the pairing is probably more based on dominance. The most dominant male gets the available females. Kathy Lee says she loves dassies. Yeah, they're certainly not something we get to see a whole lot of, and certainly not close up. So, yeah, it's wonderful to check these peculiar little animals out. Yeah, totally different to elephants. These dassies use the bathroom in the same place. So often white and brown streaks from their droppings and their urine on the rock faces that they actually live on can be a very good indication that dassies are present. Joan Mello asks, I assume seals could come here as well. Certainly, Joan. Obviously, this Cape South Coast has quite an immense population of Cape fur seals. So certainly within the realm of possibility that we could see things like seals here. Yeah, it's a testament to the kind of variety on offer in terms of wildlife species to actually see on a trip to South Africa. And very often this is sort of a triangle on a South African holiday. People do sort of the winelands, the Cape Coast, and a safari. Yeah, there is just so much available to see within sort of a 2-hour flight. Yeah, drop down to Lesotho. We even have some of the finest ski slopes in Africa. So you could easily do a safari, a ski holiday, and a trip to the coast, all in the space of about 5 or 6 days. It makes South Africa one of the top tourist destinations in the world for very good reason. These little hyraxes come in 2 different species in southern Africa. We get the rock hyrax, which is the one we're looking at the moment. And in other parts, throughout more woodland type habitat, you also get a tree hyrax. Both, without a doubt, very skilled climbers and largely vegetarian, largely herbivorous. But they've got these incredibly well-developed toe pads, a bit like a rock climber's shoes, that give them formidable grip even on these pretty smooth granite boulders. Yeah, and certainly the ability to move with some amount of agility will be their main line of survival should one of those Varu eagles or a Cape leopard or a hungry caracal chuck here. That gripping and climbing ability, though, does get a couple of these hyraxes into trouble each year. Obviously, having mentioned that this is quite a popular tourist destination, very often there are cars parked along the coastline here, and these hyraxes will investigate these parked cars occasionally, climbing up into their undercarriages, and then somebody starts that car up and drives it further into the country, all the way up to a place like Johannesburg, parks, and unfortunately a Cape rock hyrax jumps out of it. I've heard a couple of stories from the wildlife rehabbers much further up into the interior of the country, saying that they've had to sort of organize transport for a stranded hyrax to send it all the way home, back home to Cape Town. Serene Musical asks, how big do dussies get? Now, Serene Musical, they are small animals, but they can get up to a fairly significant size if the conditions are right. So a really large dussie might be 60 centimeters, 2 feet long from nose to tail, and probably weighing 5 or 6 kilos if it is a really big one. Obviously, the vast majority are quite a bit smaller than that. But as I say, if the conditions are met, if there's lots of food available, they can get a bit chunky. These guys certainly look very well fed. There are quite a few species of fagies and succulent plants that grow along the rocks very close to the beach here. And those are quite nutrient rich. We've seen the hyraxes here on a number of occasions actually feeding on them. Now, those succulents are also a wonderful source of water, so these hyraxes don't have to do a whole lot of drinking at all. Yeah, certainly quite a harsh coastline to try and make a living on, though. And you can see those sort of blackened, fairly snake-like looking plant remnants on the rocks just in front of the hyraxes. Those are actually kelp strands. So it shows how violent the ocean can actually be and how far up it can come in stormy conditions. So yeah, while this is quite a beautiful looking day down on Stony Point today, that is not always the case. Yeah, and certainly for most, the ocean temperatures around this particular part of the country are not conducive to wonderful swimming conditions. Very, very chilly temperatures. I'm sure 15 degrees Celsius, something like that. That is awfully chilly. Not quite my cup of tea. Oh, there's another hyrax. Yeah, you can see the way these rocks have been stacked, I'm sure, to protect something along this coastline. I wonder if that wasn't a human construction, but much to the delight of these rock hyraxes. That is a wonderful artificial habitat for them, with lots of nooks and crannies in which they can shelter from this, as well as few predators that also live in this area. Right, this guy's just posed in situ, and after all, that is the one pose, and certainly the nature of the live cameras, we get to of animal life. It's almost like being a fly, or obviously viewing game from or viewing wildlife from the safety of a Land Rover, even if we do it under the most ethical conditions, the animal's health and well-being, and we still get the presence and inner sighting disturbs the animal and does change its behavior. So these little windows into animal life, totally undisturbed, are quite a special thing. Snakes here in the area, like mole snakes, hunt dussies, Liam. Absolutely spuss. So when these hyraxes are born, they're only tiny little animals that probably come out about the size of your fist. And yeah, without a doubt, for a large enough snake, really large snake species, and that snake can be make a meal. Looks like a couple of pounds. Very nice. Yeah, these kelp fields can be rich in fish diversity, so there's lots of food on offer for these seabirds. many of which make a very healthy living fishing off the rocks here at Stony Point. Petro says, thank you so much, addiction. So happy we could get to a little bit of minutes for the afternoon. Yeah, apologies, as I say, for a few technical difficulties. We are keeping an eye on our other feeds. So wherever that improves, we'll certainly do a bit of looking around. Yeah, the around this Cape South coast are notoriously rich in biodiversity. I think that's specific currents coming down on the coastline, and that, of course, is the very icy cold Benguela current, and that meets the Agulhas current traveling down the opposite coast. Much warmer, very, very rich current. Certainly the mixing these two liters of water. It's just below the fast sardine runs in the world. And of course, historically, this coastline is also famous for the migrations of huge pods of whales. Southern rights hunt here down in the Cape occasionally. So yeah, if you take any interest in sea life at all, this is a pretty wonderful part of the world to visit. Alrighty, well, in the interest of keeping things moving, let's check out another new location for this afternoon at Comfort's Dam. A windy looking afternoon at Tuesday. There we are. Not huge flamingos probably find the change in seasons with these birds these flamingos travel huge distances, and looking at here at the moment could easily pop up at a place. Now the first officer as a kid was running along a beach in northern Mozambique and spotted large flocks of these flamingos flying north, without a doubt heading up to parts of East Africa. Conditions. to seeing the specific thing. We are back once again here at Jamala in the Dikwe. This is, of course, a reserve right up on South Africa's northwesternmost boundary with neighboring Botswana to the north. And it is a hive of activity around the water's edge today. We've had some wonderful views of elephants, a couple of giraffes, wildebeest, zebra, with, I'm sure, more to come as we approach 2 p.m., which is the hottest day out on, or the hottest time of the day, out in the bush. So who knows what we'll have coming down here. And the signal seems to have stabilized somewhat. We have to keep chatting with you. But we certainly won't stop trying. And once again, that is the beauty of having lots of different feeds to kind of check in with. We have a need for the afternoon. Move the African savanna elephants, after all, are daily drinkers, if at all possible. Most elephants seem to like to drink multiple times per day, which makes enough sense when you know that an adult elephant will drink 203 each day. Bigs when it comes to hydration. Hello, Darkman Lover, and thank you for the very kind comment. Darkman Lover says, "The water, your expertise is very much appreciated. I'm being a regular and sticking with us. Apologies for a slightly shaky feed today, but I guess these things happen sometimes." and a bird of impala rutting activity going on in the background there. So possibly a couple of testosterone females, a bit of females. Yeah, the gestation period for the reliable old impala, like 9 months, and the females do seem to lambs pretty perfectly with the arrival of the rain. Our landscape is such a limit to the health, happiness, and ultimately the facing out here. If you put yourself in the shoes of a female, female in her womb, and once that lamb is around to produce a nutrient-rich milk, she certainly has to consume a good diet. So I mentioned in a slightly earlier segment, wildebeest bulls are highly territorial animals. So you can see quite a bit of activity in this mud right at the water's edge, with that sort of face planting, head stamping that they do, as well as pawing at the ground. They'll also quite regularly urinate into the mud, and all of that serves to kind of accentuate their own scent. Their urine, especially for a very dominant bull, will contain elevated levels of testosterone, and certainly to a group of females looking for a prospective mate, that's a very clear indication of the most dominant male in the environment. Yeah, a bit like the wildebeest equivalent to a nice spritz of Hugo Boss cologne. It's all about pheromones. Yeah, I think as humans we have a fairly limited sense of smell, and certainly it doesn't play such a significant role in human courtship and human life. We're far more visual and I guess audible animals in terms of the way we communicate. But in the animal world, of course, scent is a much bigger factor. You look at something like the African elephant in the background there, and they have a sense of smell many thousands of times stronger than the very best drug-sniffing dogs. So all manner of information is conveyed among individuals there through smell. And that can be information ranging from an animal's age to its health, its social status, its reproductive condition, possibly even that animal's individual identity. A couple of what look like hardy-dar ibises in the water in the foreground there. Probably one of the least popular birds amongst South Africans. And I think that has stemmed from their habit of landing on people's roofs at like 3 o'clock in the morning and singing their very distinctive song or making their very shrill call. But I've always liked the hardy-dar. It is the sound of South Africa's suburbs. And in many ways, they can be an indicator of a healthy environment, specializing in feeding on things like worms, which are notoriously very sensitive organisms. Should those earthworms disappear in suburban gardens due to toxicity or pesticides or things like that, the hardy-dars will disappear as well. So yeah, it's good to have them around. I'm always happy to see them in my garden at home. Yeah, we've actually got a pair of hardy-dars in the garden at home here in Nelspruit, quite close to the western boundary of the Greater Kruger National Park, that actually seems to nest here every year. They've had a couple of very unsuccessful seasons. The first year a storm knocked the nest over before they could even lay eggs. And then about 6 months ago they had a nest of fairly well-developed fledglings. Another huge tropical storm hit us, and unfortunately this nest got knocked over once again. Thankfully though, one of my hounds managed to find these little hardy-dars, stranded after the big storm, didn't hurt them, and we managed to scoop these chicks up and get them to a wildlife rehabber. Kelly asks, how often do I see the hardy-dars? Kelly, thanks very much for your question. Daily, I would say. A common feature. Nice close-up view of this handsome young elephant bull. Again, not a fully mature elephant by any means. This guy is possibly still a teenager, at the very latest, early 20s. The chap up on the bank, you can see, is significantly bigger, probably mid-20s, mid to late 20s, I'd say. We chatted about it in an earlier segment. It can be a bit tricky with elephants, trying to figure out how old they are, certainly just visually. But for many of us as naturalists, when you've spent enough time looking at them, and certainly when you've had a look at a couple of thousand of them, we get better at guesstimating, I guess. Nice bit of mud bathing there. These elephants are obviously very well known as thick-skinned animals, but perhaps quite surprisingly, a lot of their skin can be very sensitive. In particular, the paper-thin skin to the rear of their ears, on the rear surface, and certainly skin around their eyes, in their armpits, around the groin. And they also do not sweat. So any opportunity to cool themselves off, and they will happily put on a generous splattering of nice cooling mud. And that presents a nice barrier between that elephant's skin and the beating African sun, as well as preventing biting flies from getting in there. We've got a number of formidable horsefly species out here that can even penetrate through the thickest of elephant and rhino skin. So all the more reason for some protection there. You'll also notice all of those wrinkles on his flanks there. Those wrinkles increase the surface area of his skin by up to 60%. So any mud and any moisture that is trapped in those folds is held onto for much longer and assists to keep the elephant cool as he moves on. Also a nice marsh terrapin basking on the rock there by the looks of things. Once again, we do try to keep these safaris as holistic as possible, getting a good look at all elements, not necessarily just the big high-profile species. So whenever we get the opportunity to check out something small, we're always happy to do that. For me specifically, the reptile kingdom is one of my absolute favorites. And we're blessed with some immense diversity of reptiles in southern Africa. As a kid, many a happy afternoon was spent searching for snakes. So Miles asks a very good question. Miles, good afternoon. Miles has asked, is the skin of rhinos just as thick? Miles, to be honest with you, the skin of the rhino is probably even thicker than that of the elephant. Rhino skin in some places can be up to 4 centimeters thick, close to 2 inches. So yeah, that's some seriously leathery skin. Of course, that's not true of their entire body. And certainly, once again, around the eyes, in particular around their lips, armpits, or not armpits, the sort of patches between their front legs as well as in their groin, much like the ellies, can be very sensitive, very soft skin. So yeah, rhinos certainly have a very high tick load. They get lots of ticks in that soft skin, and they do suffer from the effects of stinging and biting insects. Rhinos also don't produce sweat, so they love to come down to the water, have a wallow, do a little bit of a skin treatment. Also quite a few butterflies moving around there at the water's edge. Very tricky to try and get any defined idea of what those are, especially from this far away. But we are blessed with some immense butterfly biodiversity in southern Africa. We've got a little over 800 species. So if you've got any home or any time for lapidary, study of butterflies, this is a place to be. Yeah, you will see kind of these swarms of butterflies congregating on this nutrient-rich moist at the water's edge, where they land and suck and fluids off the surface. This young elephant bull it doesn't seem to be too thrilled about the blacksmith lapwing. Right, perfectly harmless. But once again, these ellies can be a little bit temperamental around the water's edge, and especially where things begin to dry out a bit, they do seem to be more defensive over their sort of pole position at the water. Chasing things like birds and warthog. Yeah, without a doubt, the elephant is the dominant party here. Thankfully, these elephants have enormous requirements in terms of meeting their feed needs. To head up into that area, Waterhole that some do, after all, spend about 80% of their time collecting food. So that will hopefully give many of these other animal species the chance to come down and have their turn at the water. This young elephant bull center screen at the moment is giving us at some elephant body language. Occasionally, the front right foot at Indo's, this elephant is sure what he wants to do next. But certainly, I think he's going to have a confrontation with the zebra, and there he goes. Cheeky. Do like to throw their weight around, so to speak, around the water's edge. I think there's definitely the most charge again. Bringing that trunk out to drive that threat home. This ball just wants to pass. I've always found to be good communicators of their that, but at work I reckon it is a greater issue, something out of our reach. But that parcel of trying to broadcast to corners of Africa's wilderness keeps us on our toes. But yeah, I certainly have found elephants to be very good communicators of their body. Those unfortunately. To fix these tech issues are ongoing, so for that, staggered community. Yeah, you out there, I guess, sitting down to a nice lunch. Yeah, let's what I'm at the fear not, and we will meet you once again at the same time. Stacey has asked a very good. I hope I can answer it without my voice breaking up. completely. So thanks for taking the time to in. Here's our hair, the skin of hip rhinos here. So Stacey, you certainly could. Look, the skin is biologically quite different between each of those three sort of pachyderm members, but certainly all three animals are famous for thick skins. I would say though that the hippopotamus, out of all three, probably has the most sensitive skin, and certainly it is skin that, if exposed to direct sunlight for prolonged periods, shows the greatest signs of damage, and certainly the most quickly. We've seen it in a number of recent droughts that have hit kind of southern and sub-Saharan Africa in recent years. I'm thinking more like 2016, 2017, 2018. But across much of the Greater Kruger, we saw an enormous decline in hippo populations. Possibly as many as 5,000 hippos died in the space of about 6 months in 2017. It was really, really bleak. These poor hippos with absolutely no place anywhere in the habitat to submerge themselves and escape that sun, experienced this horrible cracking effect on that skin. Obviously living in filthy conditions, infection gets in there fairly rapidly, and they were dying, I guess, of a combination of reduced immune systems as well as starvation, because there simply wasn't enough food around. But I digress. All three of those herbivores famed for very thick skin, though. As I say, rhinos about 2 inches thick in some places. Ellies probably an inch to maybe an inch and a half. I'd say hippos at the lower end of that scale, maybe an inch. They do, however, reckon that an adult hippo bull, so a very large individual at like 2.5 to 3 tons, has a skin that accounts for something like 30% of its body weight, which is pretty mind-blowing. The skin isn't all made up of dermis, though. There's a fairly thick, blubbery layer within. I wonder if we'll get a nice greeting ceremony from these two bulls. We may do. Certainly a very submissive gesture, lifting that trunk up from the younger individual. We also very regularly see two elephants that are sort of meeting each other or greeting each other after a bit of an absence, placing their trunks in one another's mouths and fairly tenderly clacking their tusks together. All fairly gentle and affectionate. Without a doubt, these two elephant bulls are in the same bachelor group, I would say. Annika has asked a very interesting question, so thanks for that, Annika. She has said, I've always wondered, how are these really big animals weighed? And Annika, the most honest answer is that very often they're not weighed at all. So I think a lot of our figures published in textbooks that many naturalists and guides sort of parrot off ad lib are from estimates made possibly even 100 years ago, when much of that information was sort of originally listed. It's quite fascinating. Most of our textbooks list an adult African elephant bull at about 6 tons, 6 tons maximum. But chatting to a wildlife vet recently, who was involved in tranquilizing and radio collaring an elephant bull in the Greater Kruger, where they had the opportunity to lift that elephant bull, only in his 30s, so not a fully grown male, up onto a flatbed truck with a crane, and the crane had a scale, and that elephant bull was closer to 7.5 tons in weight. So I think certainly that 6-ton estimate for things like elephant bulls is a bit on the low side. And when you see them up close, you can understand it. They are vast animals. Clearly something more pressing has caught the attention of this young individual. It does look like he is planning to head off up into the bush, back and behind this waterhole. Now, once again, that's probably the fairly pressing need to get some food in his belly. Elephants have a mammoth task, if you will excuse that pun, in collecting enough food each day to survive. A big enough bull, a fully mature adult male, is probably consuming something like 1/4 ton, so over 500 pounds of vegetation each day. Their stomachs, after all, are remarkably inefficient systems, so much of that plant material comes through virtually undigested, but that does tend to be quite good for the environment because it places a lot of that plant material back onto the surface of the soil. It's quite nicely mulched, very often with a large content of undigested seeds. And that material can be broken down by decomposers, and certainly as it just decays naturally, many of those trapped nutrients are given back to the soil, and the soil is reinvigorated. Elephants, without a doubt, are some of the most phenomenal seed dispersers on this African landscape. A combination of those remarkably weak stomach systems means that the vast majority of plant seeds are undigested and undamaged. And then, of course, elephants travel vast distances on foot. So as they travel, they defecate throughout the day, depositing seeds far away from the parent plant. There are many experts that reckon the survival of the Congo rainforest up on Africa's equator is intrinsically linked to the presence of the African forest elephant, the smaller cousin of these savanna ellies. In the absence of those forest elephants, which are under some pressure at the moment from poaching, logging, habitat loss, it is believed that that forest will suffer greatly. Annika has also asked another very good question. Is it true that elephants don't like bees? And if a bee were to sting an elephant, would there be any effects? Certainly, Annika, it is well documented that the African honeybee seems to be the number one concern of African elephants. And those honeybees can be a very effective tool if you want to keep elephants out of areas. A phenomenal local conservation group called Elephants Alive has had noticeable success keeping elephants out of subsistence agricultural areas, often in the local communities that border onto these wild places, these game reserves, simply by erecting a couple of beehives on wires around the perimeter of those sort of cornfields or sorghum fields. Obviously, as soon as an elephant comes along, brushes against the wire, shakes the hive a bit, swarm of very angry bees comes out. And yeah, it's well documented that the ellies turn tail and run away. Now, I'm not sure of the exact effects of a bee sting on an elephant, but ellies are vomeronasal breathers. So they only have the ability to breathe through the trunk, and there is no breathing whatsoever that occurs through the mouth. So, yeah, it's certainly not too much of a stretch of the imagination to say that if a honeybee was to go up into that elephant's trunk, which is arguably even more sensitive than the inside of our human nostrils, if that bee were to sting it in the right place and some swelling were to happen, I would think that could be quite life-threatening for an elephant. And certainly I've experimented with it in areas where we've had elephants coming into lodges. That can be quite a dangerous thing. You don't really want them feeding in places where guests are walking around kind of unsupervised. It can be quite dangerous. So yeah, a number of times headed onto YouTube, opened a video of sort of angry bees. I played it with a little Bluetooth speaker walking towards a big elephant bull, and on every occasion it has caused that elephant to flee in the opposite direction. So yeah, certainly there is some phobia there. That elephant is full of beans though, giving those wildebeest a real run for their money. But yeah, certainly with things calming down in terms of elephant presence around the waterhole here at Jamala in Madikwe, and many of these other herbivores will finally have their chance to come down and slake those thirsts. An urgent and critical task at this time of year. Quite a few giraffes around as well. Yeah, it is plain to see that the wildlife of this particular area is in for a particularly challenging dry season. There is no real substantial rain forecast for these areas, as is quite natural for this time of the year, until the arrival of the summer once again, much later in the year. So yeah, certainly dry and hungry conditions for many of these herbivores. But that is nature's way. It will certainly weed out many of the weaker or sicker individuals, hopefully leaving only the very strongest of animals behind, to hopefully have the opportunity to reproduce when the times are good. With the onset of the summer rains in the wet season next season. Can be very harsh to witness though, and I think a lot of people, especially on a first time safari, find it very challenging to see animals suffering. Yeah, I guess any human with empathy doesn't want to see an animal having a hard time and not getting enough food. But what we must understand is that this is an essential element of this landscape and of the functioning of these systems. Harsh, but for the greater good. Ideally, these wild systems should be large enough to allow animals to move in search of greener pastures and fresh drinking water. And historically in Africa, that would have been true, with large migrations of herds of elephants, wildebeest, zebra, often thousands of kilometers from south to north. It is well within the realm of possibility that elephants would have transitioned from populations in this Madikwe area up as far afield as parts of Kenya and Tanzania. However, movements like that are simply not possible anymore. At the rate that Africa has been colonized and developed by humans, border fences have popped up in the way, highways, cities, towns. So yeah, it is certainly a very different landscape. Hence, the need for many of these completely fenced-off reserves to provide artificial sources of water, to provide, essentially a source of life throughout these very trying times. And in truth, in severe drought periods, really extreme years where almost no rain falls at all, many of these reserves will be obliged even to provide food in the form of something like lucerne or hay. But that's not really a position you want to be in. A very expensive task when you think a single elephant eats a quarter ton of that stuff every day. So keep these areas wild, and we need to establish corridors that give these animals the ability to have something of a range. Wherever possible, I guess. But yeah, we are kind of approaching the final 5 or 6 minutes of the Live at the Waterhole show for this afternoon. And in spite of some tech difficulties, thanks very much for joining us. It has still been an interesting and varied look at some pretty wild locations. I'm lucky to be back on your screens tomorrow as well as the day after that, so the 3rd, 4th and 5th of May. So certainly be sure to check in with us again same time tomorrow for hopefully a slightly more stable feed and certainly, without doubt, a lot more interesting African animals and African landscapes to chat about. So be sure to stop on by once again. It's never a dull day, that's for sure. Yeah, I started watching these Live at the Waterhole type feeds. I think predominantly it was the Africam feed, Pete's Pan, which I believe was in Botswana. I was only about 10 at the time, so that was a good 22 years ago. Incredible that it has come full circle. I count myself very lucky to be sat here all this time down the line, having a look at these feeds once again and chatting to all of you. And it is pretty mind-blowing to think that it is a little bit of natural content being streamed into people's private spaces, people's living rooms, people's homes, all across the world. I think we could all do with a little bit more nature in our lives. A lot of that connection with the natural world has broken down, I think, naturally through our urbanization as a species. So, if at all possible, get out into your garden, check out some birds, get some vitamin D from the sun. It's good for you. And for all other cases, WildEarth.